For the past month now, I've been working my way through every single 3D battle simulator game that the Pokemon franchise has to offer. Each one, so far, has been kind of a big deal. I mean, each one was a symbol of its respective generation, not only in the available Pokemon pool, but also in the look and feel of the gameplay and worlds they provided. We've made it up to Generation 3, a generation that I think proved the Pokemon franchise would have some real longevity. Gen 1 doing big numbers, that could be a fluke. Some real flash in the pan stuff. Random stars appear and burn out all the time. Gen 2, okay, now we're getting somewhere. We're still doing good, people like what we got, but maybe we're just capitalizing on the hype of the first game. Now Gen 3, we know we've got something here now. People keep coming back for more, and I do not blame them. However, all things have to end. That's what we all know to be true. In November of 2004, Nintendo released the DS, a brand new handheld console. Naturally, with a new handheld on the advent, one would assume that the Pokemon franchise was preparing for Generation 4, and you'd be surprisingly very wrong. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure who is in charge of timing things out for Pokemon, but I'm looking back at release dates and some things just don't quite add up. Pokemon Emerald, my all-time favorite video game of any franchise and any genre, came out on September 16th, 2004, about 2 months before the DS would come out, which kind of makes sense, I suppose, but that was only in Japan. It didn't hit American store shelves for another 8 months, not coming out until May 1st, 2005. It's no wonder that Emerald has the second worst mainline sales figures of any game in the series. People were already playing Mario 64 when this game came out. Pokemon had a really interesting transitionary period between Gens 3 and 4. In my head, it lasted years, but looking back, it was really on par with a modern generation. I think it is because of a bunch of Gen 3 spin-off titles that helped build up the hype for Generation 4, including today's game, Pokémon XD, Gale of Darkness. Last time we covered Pokémon Colosseum, Generation 3's definitive battle simulator. Apparently, the notion of shadow Pokemon blew everyone's mind so hard that they had to make a sequel, making it the only one of the 3D battle simulators to get a definitive sequel, at least if you don't count the Japanese stadium game. I tried to find out what it was about Colosseum that made the Pokemon Company set on making a sequel, but for the life of me, I couldn't find anything. Nothing from developers or even Nintendo execs talking about how they were so desperate for more of the Orre region. But nothing really exists. The only thing I could find was an old interview Reggie Fils-Aimé did with IGN, where he said that Pokémon XD wasn't a sequel to Colosseum.
My body is ready.
I have no idea if this was true at one point in development and then they pivoted at some point. I have nothing about what went into making this game. So, let's just go ahead and start playing it. Now, if I've learned anything from playing Pokemon Colosseum, is that the genius Sonority Boys know how to set a tone, and they do so pretty well right from the title screen. While the first game had a fairly generic but still exciting opening title animation, XD starts with a dark and dramatic music build. I really like it. I don't think it's quite as visually interesting as Pokemon Colosseum, but it still paints a picture. In case you were wondering, the XD stands for Extra Dimension, which I always felt was a missed opportunity to call it Extra Darkness, but hey, what do I know? Anyway, let's hit new game and see what this has to offer. And if you guessed a Shadow Lugia stealing a frickin' super freighter right out of the ocean, then you'd be right. Listen, it's not exactly the gang violence of the last game, but it still sets a mood. I also like that this helicopter pilot's eyepiece is Pokeball shaped. Why was that necessary? Then we get thrown into a battle with a Metagross, but it's okay because our level 50 Salamence has Earthquake and we can beat it into the ground only for it all to be a simulation. Not the Lugia part, that's confirmed by a news report later. Our intro battle between two pseudo-legends was just a battle simulator. We don't get to start the game with incredibly powerful Pokemon, we start with a level 10 Eevee. That does give us options, but it's a little underwhelming. Honestly, this whole intro kind of seems a little underwhelming, at least in comparison to Colosseum. That game started off by showing how dope our character was, and then setting us in a waterhole in the desert like a cool anime edgelord western. This game starts us in a lab, as a child, with a mom. It is more in line with a standard Pokemon game plot, but I do feel like it's lacking a bit in the epic department. The fun of Colosseum was how far out there it was. XD at least starts a bit more tame. As a child, I had this theory that the player protagonist in XD was the son of the Colosseum protagonist, and that your mom in this game was actually the girlfriend from the last game. I think because your Eevee is stated as being from the player character's dad, and our protagonist from the last game had two evolutions. The theory doesn't make a single iota of sense, because it's stated quite clearly that the Cipher incident was only 5 years ago, and you even have a little sister in the game, who talks in the third person for some reason, but hey, at least she's not permanently stapled to you. XD does take some time to get the plot really going, so we end up doing a couple of fetch quests for a little bit, while the adults at the lab work on a special project. We pick up our kid sister from Luigi's mansion, and at one point we're sent to pick up someone's order at a shop in a nearby town. It's all that sort of thing. I do like that they're putting in some new locations in this game, as Kaminko's mansion, the Pokemon HQ lab, and Gadianport all help Orre feel a bit more like a real region, as opposed to just a retread of the last game. Unfortunately, we do have to explore these areas with the help of a functional scooter instead of the dopest bike in history, but whatever. Professor Crane, leader of the Pokemon HQ lab, says he wants us to help with the big project everyone's working on, which is a device that can help shadow Pokemon. He states that it's been slow to develop because there aren't any shadow Pokemon left, but he wants to be prepared in case one appears again. However, to get a hold of a shadow Pokemon, one will need to take it from its wielder, which is why we're entrusted with a brand new snag machine. It's all shiny. And as luck would have it, Cipher peons decide that this is the proper moment to attack the lab and kidnap the professor, while using shadow Pokemon. In lieu of a girlfriend with unexplained abilities to see aura, Pokemon XD gives the player this handy Dragon Ball Z Scouter to detect them for us. This Shadow Teddiursa gets caught without any issue. I'm pretty sure they jacked the catch rate for this battle so you can't fail it. Now the plot can really begin, as shadow Pokemon will actually start showing up. While in Gadianport, trying to help the lab continue Professor Crane's work without him, we run into a few characters of note. First is this guy. His name is Zook. Look at him. Zook threatens us with a shadow Pokemon, jingle jingle jingle. But luckily, this very nice and definitely important, please remember him, old man sends his henchman, attendant, to fight him for us. Thanks, Mr. Verrich. We eventually track the kidnappers to Cipher's old shadow Pokemon lab, where we meet the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, who are notable because they give you access to a great variety of shadow Pokemon, from which you can start building a proper team. I want to take a moment to highlight the Cipher team getup in this game. I definitely don't dislike the design from Colosseum, but man are the XD grunts such an improvement. Most aren't multicolored like the cast of Super Sentai here. Most have these slick white armor sets that make them look awesome. I would love to see someone cosplay as one of these guys. In the Colosseum video, I lamented the fact that nearly every shadow Pokemon was a Johto Pokemon, as I wanted to see more Hoenn Pokemon than the 7 available in a Gen 3 battle simulator. What I failed to mention, because I honestly forgot about it, is that the Colosseum game doesn't have a single Shadow Kanto Pokemon either. XD has a great variety. There are a decent variety of Gen 2 and 3 Pokemon in the first area, but there's also a decent number of Kanto Pokemon in the mix too, with more and more the later you go. In fact, actually counting up the list made me realize that Johto kind of got the short end of the stick again in this game, only having 11 total Pokemon, while Hoenn had 25 and Kanto had a whopping 47. Johto did have 41 shadows in the last game, so I guess they still win if you add both games together. The Cipher lab is being run by their new head of R&D, Lovrina, who is trying to make a special Pokemon called XD001, a shadow Pokemon that can't be purified. I feel like you should focus on a shadow Pokemon that can't be snagged, but hey, whatever floats your evil boat. She looks like a bad Hatsune Miku knockoff, and she battles like one too. XD has much lower levels than Colosseum across the board, and the movesets of Pokemon often reflect that. Defeating Lovrina and rescuing Crane allows the lab workers the last push they need to complete the Purification Chamber. I should probably take the time to explain that Shadow Pokemon are actually pretty different this time around. While the same basic mechanics are still there, like the shadow gauge that needs to be lowered before the Pokemon can gain EXP, new moves, etc., XD changes a lot of other stuff around it in ways that I think are generally pretty good. For starters, Shadow Pokemon have a lot more options than just Shadow Rush. There are 18 different Shadow moves available in the game, and they all do different things. You got moves like Shadow Blitz that deal basic damage, status moves like Shadow Mist and Shadow Hold, which always kind of looked like the Pokemon was being held down with glowing film tape to me. There's even a Shadow Weather condition called Shadow Sky, which works like Hail or Sandstorm but for Shadow Pokemon. There are stronger moves like Shadow End that deals massive recoil damage, or the incredibly powerful Shadow Half, which halves all HP for all Pokemon on the field, but requires a cooldown turn like Hyper Beam. They even introduced the physical special split a generation early. Moves like Shadow Blitz will do physical damage, but moves like Shadow Rave are special. Remember, this is Gen 3, where every other move in the game is decided by type. It's crazy they implemented a highly desired feature into Pokemon in a side game for only one kind of move. The second big change is to Hyper Mode. It's gotten a lot worse for us as it kind of doesn't exist anymore. There's now Reverse Mode, which doesn't waste a turn when the Pokemon goes into it, but also comes with no benefits and only drawbacks. Most notably the fact that it deals a bit of damage every turn. You no longer get the awesome critical hit boost, so you're better off just getting rid of Reverse Mode the second it appears, which I think takes a little bit of fun out of it. The third big change is the Purify Chamber. While you can just purify your shadows at the Relic Stone like last time, this time around you have a far less grindy option. In the Purify Chamber, you have these sets. By placing non-Shadow Pokemon in the chamber alongside a Shadow Pokemon, the Purify Chamber will passively lower the Shadow gauge until that Pokemon is ready to be purified, which it can do internally. You even get a notification on your PDA when a Pokemon is ready, which can also be a bit annoying when you put shadows in all 9 sets. You can increase the rate of purification by putting up to 4 non-shadows on each set, and by arranging them in rings of type effectiveness. For example, by pointing my Poison-type Shadow Grimer at this Grass-type Hoppip, which points at a Water-type Carvana, which points at a Fire-type Numel, which points at an Ice-type Steel, which points at a Hoppip again, I form a ring of super effective damage that maximizes the tempo of the chamber and lowers the gauge the fastest. I find it really fun to see what sorts of rings I can cobble together out of the available Pokemon, and the Purify Chamber does a really good job. I didn't actually purify every Pokemon in Colosseum, because the last few would have just been a big grind session to hammer out for no real reason. In XD, purifying the entire Shadow Pokemon roster is almost a foregone conclusion, and the process is still an enjoyable puzzle instead of feeling like it has just been handed to you. The fourth change of note is actually about snagging. In the last game, while there were options for a lot of the Pokemon if you failed to snag them, it can be a real pain and often involved waiting until the post-game. In XD, all Shadow Pokemon can be found again, thanks to a little assist from our friend Mirror B, sporting some stylish new threads and another killer theme song. Mirror B is no longer a member of Cipher. He's gone freelance. At one point in this game, you get an item called the Mirror Radar. If you fail a Shadow Pokemon that belonged to anyone other than the last boss, who can be rematched infinitely, and you wait for a bit, you'll get a notification on the radar pointing you to a spot on the map. If you go there, you'll be able to fight Mirror B and he'll have that missed Shadow on his team. Let's check back in on the plot. While this game suffers from not having nearly as memorable villains or locations as its older brother, it makes up for that with some really interesting story beats. After rescuing Professor Crane, we're sent to Pirate Town and ONBS, the local news station that runs out of Mirror B's old headquarters. We meet up with the old Kids Grid, the resistance cell that we teamed up in the last game, who now are the preeminent journalists in the region, which is pretty cool. We need Net to use his tech skills to try and get some data off a CD that we swiped back at the lab, but this makes ONBS a target of Cipher, who invade the building and we have to repel them. The data we get points us to an operation in Phoenix City, but everything looks alright here. Eventually, after investigating, we find out that basically the entire town has been replaced by Cipher. I really like this part of the plot because there's a bit of environmental storytelling to it. When you get to Phoenix, all of the NPCs look the exact same as they did in Colosseum, but they'll have different Pokemon, and you might just assume that the 5-year time jump covers that, but then you realize that the Pokemon now seen in town are all dark and ghost types, perfect for sneaky little liars like Cipher. The Phoenix operation is run by Snaddle, who is a massive pain with his love of Shadow Sky and Weather Ball, but he eventually goes down all the same. Another cool plot point is the SS Libra, the cargo ship from the beginning of the game. We're tasked with finding a Bonsly that was on board that ship. This marks the first appearance of Bonsly in a mainline Pokemon game. I did tell you they were building to Gen 4 with the release of this game, right? We find the remains of the SS Libra in the desert where Lugia dropped it, and it has been picked clean by Cipher. We run them out and we do find the Bonsly, but it runs away from us. Before we can even begin tracking it down though, we are confronted by Team Snag'em, who drug us with sleep powder and swipe the snag machine. Again, an interesting plot point. We get to see a bit of what it looks like for the world if we can't capture the Shadow Pokemon. Namely, the fact that there are all these tantalizing Pokemon that we can't catch. Tracking down Snag'em has us fighting Gonzap, who apparently lost a lot of levels between game, and we retrieve our snag machine. It didn't fit his
24 pythons!
Anyway, and a neat thing is we end up striking a deal with Gonzap. Cipher's downfall screwed over Team Snag'em, which naturally ticks off Gonzap, so he decides to back us in an the enemy of my enemy is my friend sort of way. When we try to break into Cipher's key lair where they are mass-producing Shadow Pokemon, Gonzap actually helps us out by drugging the muscle-bound guards with sleep powder again. Kinda pays to have friends who are hardened criminals. The Cipher key lair is run by Gorgon, who leaps over his desk like a freaking great ape when it's time to battle. Then again, we did destroy his Shadow Pokemon factory, so I kinda get it. He shows us a really neat thing that this game does that ups the difficulty just a little bit. He, and many of the peons in his lair and from here on out, have more than one Shadow Pokemon. It creates this feeling of tension, especially with some of the harder to catch Pokemon, because you have to use one of your Pokemon's turns to throw a ball, and if it fails, the opponent just gets free time to set up or attack, and more Shadow Pokemon increases the danger. It also makes these boss fights really stick out, because they don't have the same level of coherent strategy that the last game did. Gorgon kind of uses the Earthquake Protect strat, but the others don't really use anything of the sort. Defeating Gorgon will reveal the true bad guy was actually Mr. Verridge. Yeah, that seemed kind of obvious in retrospect, but it was still dope when I was a child. His real name is definitely not overdoing it, Greevil, as in greed and evil. They should have gone with his Japanese name of Death Gold. Greevil challenges us to a fight at his base of operations, Dark Isle, a fortress in an impassable section of the ocean surrounded by massive storms and whirlpools. You'd think that would make it pretty hard to get to, but luckily we know an eccentric inventor who can build us a custom Kyogre speedboat capable of getting to Dark Isle. Dark Isle is one of the coolest locations in Pokemon because it's basically a non-stop gauntlet full of trainers with strong shadow Pokemon, puzzles, and rematch boss fights against the various admins. You move through the docks, the weather controlling labs, rooms full of lava, crazy crane navigation, and more, all the way to the top, where Grandmaster Greevil waits for us. At one point, we even get to his inner lair, but he just says nope and drops a wall in front of us, causing us to have to figure out how to go around. We also have to beat his bodyguards, Argos and Eldes. They're honestly some of the toughest fights in the game. Eldes specifically was the only person I actually lost to in my playthrough, because he has a super tanky Shadow Lapras and a super low catch rate Shadow Salamence. Before I cover the final battle, I want to talk about some side content that I spent way too much time on. Pokémon XD does not have as many post-game quests as Colosseum. Mount Battle returns, but there isn't much else. I'll cover what XD does have, but I'm telling you, there's really not much there. It makes up for this with some really interesting side content that can really eat up your time. The first are Pokespots. You will recall from my Colosseum video that the Orre region does not have wild Pokemon. Pokemon XD changes this by introducing Pokespots. There are 3 locations in the game that are just empty areas with these plates in the middle of the room. If you put a Poke Snack on the plate and wait, eventually you'll get a notification that a wild Pokemon has appeared there, with 3 different options for each spot. And there are some really good options here, like Zubat or Trapinch. I personally used an Aeron that I caught here for my team for this playthrough. There's also a trade opportunity. The man in charge of Pyrite Colosseum, Duking, who I ran out of time to talk about in the last video, will offer to trade you if you can bring him one of the rarest spawns at each spot. And he trades you a Shuckle, Meditite, and even a Larvitar. He doesn't even use the trading animation, even though this game has one built in, but either way, these are some good Pokemon. The Larvitar would even be usable because it gets the boosted EXP from being a trade, and it doesn't even have an annoying nickname. There's also a chance of running into a Munchlax at the Pokespot. You can't catch it or battle it because it belongs to the herbalist lady, who will apologize for her Pokemon, give you some new Pokesnacks, and a free herbal medicine. I mention it because it is still a Gen 3 game with a Gen 4 Pokemon, being Munchlax. The next bonus worth mentioning are Battle CDs. Remember that simulator at the beginning of the game? Well, throughout the game you can find these CDs, and if you take them to Real Gem Tower, there's a simulator where you can play them. They essentially serve as battle puzzles, which is something that I always enjoy seeing in Pokemon games. Some are fairly simple, like Battle CD 3, which is just about timing dig and dive to counter Solar Beam and fly. Battle CD 11 has a really fun setup where you have to use Sandstorm and Spikes to watch a team of Shedinja die one by one. A couple are more random, like Battle CD 35 being a metronome battle. The endgame Battle CDs are incredibly difficult battles where you have to pray you're reading the opponent's moves right. Battle CD 47 might be one of the hardest fights I've ever taken on, as landing enough damage with Latios and Latias against Ho-Oh and Lugia, where they have incredibly powerful coverage moves, can be pretty rough. These CDs are a really fun distraction. Beating them can get you some good items and battle coupons that can be spent on rare TMs, but I honestly think the battles themselves are fun enough to warrant the distraction even without a reward. And the final distraction that I want to mention is Battle Bingo. I spent way too much time playing Battle Bingo. It takes the idea of a battle puzzle way further. The basic idea of Battle Bingo is that you're given a bingo card and you need to draw lines across it. Each tile on the card is an encounter with a Pokemon of the type it says it is. Flipping a tile requires spending an energy point on the Pokemon you do have. You can catch the Pokemon you encounter, though you have to give them back when you're done, and you can flip the mystery tiles for more EP or another Master Ball. The first few bingo cards that you're given are fairly simple and can be beaten by merely matching the tile with the right Pokemon with super effective damage. However, the later bingo cards up the ante, asking you to get just the right sequence of tile flips to maximize your moves. It's a really in-depth puzzle that I really enjoyed. The bigger reason I bring up Battle Bingo is that Bonsly from earlier. After it runs away from us at the SS Libra, you can encounter it at Pokespots pretty randomly. Encountering it enough times will have you finally be able to secure it and bring it back to the old man who sent you looking for it. And as a reward, he gives you the Bonsly card. You can take this card to the Battle Bingo receptionist for a new special bingo card featuring Bonsly. It is so wild that there is a way to play with a Gen 4 Pokemon in a Gen 3 game, even if it is only temporary. I know it's just a Bonsly, but try to understand playing this game as a child before Diamond and Pearl even came out. Any new Pokemon was worthy of vast amounts of playground speculation, and Pokémon XD just gives you the ability to play with one early. Okay, enough time at the casino. We should probably get around to wrapping up the main story. The battle against Greevil begins as soon as you take the elevator to his pretty sick battle arena. He does the Volo thing before Volo by using more than 6 Pokemon, immediately starting us in a fight against XD001 Shadow Lugia. I don't think I've given enough attention to Shadow Lugia. Probably because I don't know what else I could say about how awesome this thing is that hasn't been said a million times over by a million different people. But it is awesome. What an epic boss fight, and it's over. Yeah, you see, Volo was tough because he dropped the Giratina forms at the end of his boss fight, and there were no snag machines in Hisui. Shadow Lugia exists in a time period where I have a Master Ball, so it's over. As a little pro tip, just leave a Pokemon behind before you start this fight, so Lugia can be added to your party instantly. I put my Xatu away because of the obvious type overlap, and you're gonna want Shadow Lugia's bulk for the main fight. After losing his precious XD001, Greevil attacks with a full team of 6 Shadow Pokemon, including all 3 legendary birds. This is why I recommended bringing Shadow Lugia. Lugia, as a Pokemon, is already pretty bulky, but Shadow Pokemon are resistant to Shadow attacks, meaning you can just have Lugia sitting there while you're spamming Ultra and Timer Balls. While Lugia makes the fight a lot easier, it is still pretty tough. All of his Pokemon have powerful Shadow moves, and he's not going to go down easily. This fight takes a long time, as you have to catch 3 legendaries if you want to do it properly, but it never feels like a chore that you're tediously grinding through. It still feels like a boss fight, at least until the end where you got 1 or 2 Shadow Pokemon left and they just don't want to be caught. Defeating Greevil will save the world and the credits will roll. Now we can get into the post-game, though admittedly there isn't much here. First and foremost, there is the Orre Colosseum, a new battle facility that Colosseum Girlfriend's grandpa has put together. I didn't do it. I'm gonna be honest, this battle facility is not for the faint of heart. All the battles require really high level Pokemon, and I didn't want to do the grinding necessary, especially because the only rewards for beating it are some admittedly pretty rare in Gen 3 TMs. The more interesting part for me are the last Shadow Pokemon. While everything, even Greevil's Shadow Legendaries, can be purified with the Purified Chamber, like normal, Lugia is different. Its Shadow Gauge never drops for any reason. It never enters reverse mode. Nothing. That's because it's a puzzle. You need to arrange your Pokemon in the Purified Chamber so that you have 9 sets at full tempo. 9 full rings of super effective damage. Then, placing Shadow Lugia in the chamber can purify it instantly, foiling Cipher's final plan for the unpurifiable Shadow Pokemon. Also at some point after catching all the Shadow Pokemon, you'll get a notification on the Mirror Radar, which will take you to the Gadian Port Lighthouse, where you can have one final confrontation with the Master of Groove. He is the most powerful trainer in this game outside of any battle facility, and he has 5 level 57 Ludicolo. Honestly, they're pretty great. Each one knows Rain Dance, and almost all of them have Giga Drain and either Waterfall or Hydro Pump for coverage. I traded in a high-level Swampert and a Metagross for my Sapphire version to make this fight easier on myself, and he's still not exactly easy to beat. His final Pokemon is a Shadow Dragonite, which according to the workers at the Cipher Key Lair is the last Shadow ever created. It's also the highest level Shadow in the game, clocking in at level 55. Catch it and end the Shadow threat forever. And now we find ourselves at the end of another Pokemon 3D battle simulator. Pokémon Colosseum and XD are probably my favorites of this little subgenre because of their unique story mode. However, how do they stand up against each other now that I'm analyzing them in a more critical light? I think Pokémon Colosseum has the better story and world of these two games. It leaned more into the gritty nature of the setting and showed a version of the Pokémon world that wasn't as friendly as what we're used to. Pokémon XD tells a story that's a bit more positive. This world is largely at peace already. It's developing, it's getting cleaner and nicer, but it honestly feels more sanitized and safe, losing some of the edge that made Orre stand out. They even filled in the Under, my favorite place. However, I think Pokémon XD is a better game. The new Shadow Pokemon moves and mechanics make using them in battle not feel repetitive. The Purify Chamber removes the grind from purification. There's even a greater variety of Pokemon for you to choose from, as there are nearly twice as many obtainable Pokemon. You can even save anywhere you want, while Colosseum only let you save at PCs. I've complained a bit about Pokémon XD not being as hard or as hardcore as Pokémon Colosseum, but it does improve upon the base gameplay of what came before in ways that make the overall experience a lot better, even if the story they built on top of those improvements ends up feeling a little bit shallow. Both games are great, and I highly recommend them to people who have never played them before, especially if you love the Gen 3 era of Pokemon. Now, I'm going to ask that you join me next week as the revolution will be televised in Pokemon Battle Revolution. See you then. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. I'll see you next time. Bye.